I always use the example, your ladder falls on somebody's Mercedes. So those are the things that actually happen, and this is why the general liability policy is important.
Hello, and welcome back to this episode of the Practice Makes Profit podcast. I'm Emma Ridgie, the director of My Professional Net, and today I'm joined again with John Torvi. John, thank you for being here.
Good morning, Emma. Happy to be here.
I've talked with John previously on our MPN Expert Highlights series, so if you haven't seen that, I encourage you to watch that before we dive into this episode. But kicking it right off, we talked previously and you gave us a basic introduction to insurance. Can we start today by discussing what some of the most relevant types of insurance there are specifically for home inspectors who are the audience of this series?
Thank you, Emma. There are really two types of insurance that are at the top of the list in terms of their relevance and importance for home inspectors. And in fact, one or both of these are mandated in about half of the states in order for a home inspector to practice. And those two types of insurance would be E&O, or errors and omissions insurance, and also general liability insurance. And they really cover a home inspector or a home inspector's business while they're performing a professional service. In other words, they're out there doing the home inspection. So let's talk about errors and omissions first, which is easily the most complex type of insurance, but also, again, the most important, I think, in many ways. Errors and omissions insurance, E&O insurance, covers the insured, the home inspector's business, while they're performing a professional service. And that means that during the course of the inspection, if the home inspector is alleged, we talked about that last week, alleged to have committed some type of error or omission, they missed a defect in the property, they misstated, or deemed incorrect information on their report, could get sued at some point down the road by typically the buyer of the property, and be sued for missing a foundation crack or a leaky roof or some other allegation during the course of the inspection. The errors and omissions insurance is important because it really defines what you're covered for. And we know that a home inspector can do a lot of different things besides the big concept of what is an inspection. They can do mold inspection, pools and spas, infrared, termites, and so on and so forth. Now, the E&O policy may or may not cover these things automatically, and in many cases they do not. It's important for the insured, for the policy holder, to really read that policy and say, okay, in my business I do mold inspections, or I do pool and spa, or sewer and septic, or whatever they might do. Is that specifically listed in the policy that says you are covered to do a mold inspection, or you're covered for pest inspections? If it's not stated specifically, then it's up to the insured to obtain that coverage. Typically, that can be added on to one's policy. Sometimes that costs more money, sometimes it does not. But it's important to look at your policy and say, okay, this is what I do. This is what my policy said I'm covered for. And if there's not 100% match there, the insured really needs to do something about that. Because, again, a policy has coverages and it has exclusions. And those exclusions are pretty ironclad, and pretty much they're going to tell you, hey, you're not covered for this activity. Okay. A couple of other things about E&O, if I could dive a little bit into the weeds here.
Yeah.
The policy has what's called a retroactive date or a prior acts date. And that's the date typically when an insured first bought a policy. So if I bought a policy today and carried on with my business and carried on with coverage, I would be covered back until today, because we know that if I do an inspection today, I'm not going to get sued today. It's going to be sometime in the future. It might be 2 weeks or 2 months or 2 years that someone says, hey, you screwed up. So it's really important to maintain that prior acts date of coverage. And the easiest way to do that is just to not let your policy lapse. Okay, if you have a policy lapse, you can in fact lose that prior acts coverage, and then you think you're covered way back until whenever, and You're not. Okay. So again, recognizing that you do an inspection today, the lawsuit is going to come sometime in the future.
Right.
Now, a final point about that, and it begs the question, well, what happens if I retire or close my business? Well, retiring or closing your business, especially if you're a sole proprietor, does not relieve you of your legal obligation. So even though you're retired or your business is closed, you can still be sued for that home inspection you did 6 months ago or 2 years ago. So these policies feature what's called an extended reporting period. Some people call it a tail coverage. But the extended reporting period allows you to keep that prior act state that we just talked about, even though you're retired. So into the future, you're lying by the pool and all of a sudden you get this letter from a lawyer. Hey, I'm being sued. Okay, no problem. I have this extended reporting period coverage that's still going to protect me for what I did when I was working.
Right.
Okay. The other part of that coverage menu that we talked about is
Mhm.
general liability coverage. And that comes in a couple of different forms. It can be a straight commercial general liability policy, or it can also be called the BOP, or a business owner's package, which has a much broader types of coverage. Those policies will protect you if you are responsible, or again alleged to be responsible, for someone's bodily injury or property damage that results from doing a home inspection. Here's an example, and this actually happened to me. The first house I bought many decades ago, the inspector was in the attic and put his foot through the ceiling.
Mm.
Okay, so there's that property damage that this
Right.
general liability insurance would cover. Or if you're testing the water and somehow the floor gets wet and someone comes in, the homeowner comes in and slips and falls, you leave the cellar door unlocked and child falls down. Just a number of things that can go wrong by you simply being in that property. I always use the example, your ladder falls on somebody's Mercedes. So those are the things that actually happen, and this is why that
Right.
general liability policy is important.
Got it. Another point that we talked about last time was kind of some typical terms that you hear when it comes to insurance. And we talked a bit about claims. So, can you tell us a couple more common GL terms we might see, or claims if that applies here as well?
Yes, it sure does. A claim is a legal term when it comes to that insurance contract, and that's why when you read your policy, every time you see claims, the word claims, it'll be in a capital letter because it's a legally defined thing. And a claim is a demand for money. Okay, unlike a licensing complaint where somebody might complain to you to the state licensing board, a claim is an actual letter from a lawyer that says, we're suing you for $100,000 because you did this.
Okay.
Okay, so that's an important term to understand. Certainly, the insurance contract has a number of these terms. If any word begins with a capital letter, like claims,
Yeah.
it's a good idea to understand what that is. We talked about the definition of professional services. A home inspection is this, and it includes mold or sewer and septic or infrared or whatever it is, or whatever it's not would show up. Either it's not in the policy at all, or it show up in the exclusion section. Again, capital E for exclusion. So the big thing you asked about claims, you mentioned in our last session that your policy defines what a claim is, but also defines how you have to and when you have to report it. And in order for your insurance policy to respond to that, you have to follow basically the directions that the policy gives you.
Got it. And then finally, just for a final point, are there any basic risk management tips that you think might help our subscribers in these sort of situations?
Yes, there certainly are. And the number one thing, and I think that they're used universally, is a pre-inspection agreement.
Okay.
However, the quality of a pre-inspection agreement is important, because if you get sued, the plaintiff, the person that's suing you, their attorney is going to tear your pre-inspection agreement apart and look for every possible weakness in it in order to win their case. And that, again, is especially important when it comes to that the buyer or seller might expect you to do which is search for mold, or do an insect pest inspection, those kind of things.
Right.
Are they expecting you to do that, or is it not in your pre-inspection agreement? So again, just like we talked about the insurance policy and your practice lining up 100%, the pre-inspection agreement has to line up with your practice 100% as well. So there's some good templates out there for pre-inspection agreements. I would suggest whatever you use. Again, make sure it aligns with your practice, but also have your attorney take a look at it and look for those weaknesses that could be taken apart. A couple of other things, just to document and photo everything that you do or see. I don't think you can take too many photos. And I don't think you can do too much documentation. A claim might be, well, you missed a crack in the foundation. Well, the foundation might have been covered by, big, thick, heavy shrubbery or vegetation, and you couldn't see that. You couldn't see the crack. Well, how do I know that you didn't see it? Well, I have a picture that shows the foundation of the house, and it's clearly blocked. Okay. So document everything and take as many photos as you can, especially in today's digital world. Photos don't really cost any money in that sense. So anytime you see something that you think will impact your report or comes up as a red flag, especially document in photos, photo those. A couple other things quickly, just avoid a casual opinion and observations with whoever might be around while you're doing that inspection. Like, oh, gee, that roof looks like it might have a leak in it, or whatever your off the cuff comment might be, because you're acting as a professional and as an expert while you're doing that inspection. And if you just make a comment like, gee, I wonder if that foundation is in good shape or not, but you don't really note anything in your report, what you say is still going to be used against you in court. So, just be really careful, be professional at all times, have a solid pre-inspection agreement, and just document the heck out of your inspection.
Perfect. Again, great advice and great information for our subscribers. Thank you again for joining me. And before we go, do you mind reminding us where our subscribers can find you if they have any questions or just want to talk to you further?
I would be happy to speak with anyone, Emma, and my phone number is 401-744-2173. My email address is j.torvi advisory, so that's like my name, j.torvi advisory@gmail.com, and I'd look forward to hearing from anyone.
Perfect. As always, the information will be right on the screen, so it should be easily accessible for anyone that wants to get in contact with you. Thanks again for talking with me again, and have a great day.
Emma, thank you so much.